The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Ingram Micro's joint solution webinar featuring Nutanix and HYCU. We'll begin in just a moment, but for now, my name is Barrett Irby. I'm our Nutanix vendor business manager here at Ingram. I want to thank you all for jumping on today. We've got some great content for you about how these vendors work individually, but also how they come together to create a one-of-a-kind solution. Today's agenda will feature Stephan, our Nutanix technical account manager, and Bogdan Viher, HYCU's Global Channels Director, as our speakers. You can ask questions at any time using the questions box in the app. We'll save time at the end to go through anything that comes up. This webinar, just so you know, will be recorded and sent out after the event. Thanks so much for joining, and with that, I'll pass to Tim.
Thank you, Barrett. To get things going here today, we're going to start off with talking a little bit about the history of Nutanix. So the first thing we're going to talk about is what the Nutanix cloud platform is. So the key three things here are it's easy, intelligent, and it's resilient. From day one, you can quickly and non-disruptively set up and manage your cloud and deliver all critical apps, data, and services across private and hybrid clouds. This frees up cycles from mundane activities to focus on those higher value tasks. It has built-in AI and adaptive machine learning to ensure app performance and help you plan for resources. You can rely on your cloud to detect and resolve slowdowns in addition to security deviations. You also eliminate data loss or downtime, keeping your business running and data safe with built-in security, data protection, backup, and disaster recovery. So let's get into a little bit about what the problem was, why Nutanix came into being. So the problem is that traditional infrastructure was complex and hard to manage. It required negotiating with multiple vendors and careful selection and integration of technologies. Once deployed, it needed to be managed by specialized teams that focus on the management of each of these individual silos of the infrastructure. And at this point, when things go wrong, you can find these teams in war rooms with their individual sets of tools to troubleshoot the issues, which often leads to finger pointing instead of collaborative problem resolution. Now, to make matters worse, routine upgrades are complex and time-consuming that require immense attention to detail. They are also very disruptive to business operations, which is why they are often performed during the weekends. Now, I can talk from personal experience working in an enterprise data center that, a number of these things actually did happen, and it really makes your IT staff a little bit unruly over the weekend. So when you can eliminate these problems, it definitely helps to, please the staff there too, which is another bonus. So overall, that process can be exhausting. And in this presentation, we're going to show how the platform can alleviate these individual pain points. So now what we did was we learned from the hyperscalers. The hyperscale web companies kind of created a new model for data center architecture due to their unique scale requirements. Their solution was commodity servers, commodity Ethernet, commodity Linux. Every data center service as a code, which is programmed into these commodity interchangeable servers at deployment time. Self-healing software automatically protected the data and services when hardware failed. And they also use data locality, where data and services are co-located for improved performance, scale, and predictability. So now let's take a look at what the centralized storage architecture was, the traditional three-tier. So at the beginning, servers were these isolated islands of traditional IT infrastructure. And next, we introduced virtualization. This enabled the server consolidation at that point, reducing wasted CPU resources by running multiple workloads on the same set of hardware. After that, they centralized storage on storage area networks, or SANs. This enabled VM mobility features, unlocking new levels of flexibility when deploying and managing server workloads. This enabled servers to operate as distributed pools of compute resources, but storage remained an isolated island in the data center. So that was kind of a key problem there. So there are a few key challenges with storage being centralized in SAN storage arrays. First, SAN storage is deployed as a monolithic hardware device, necessitating intensive planning to ensure enough resources are available when needed without wasting capital by massively overbuying. Second, the nature of storage being separate from the compute layer, as well as the expense of the storage resources, requires rigid processes into application provisioning, slowing down the process of deploying applications. advance the slide. My bad. So third, the refreshing storage hardware resources is a cumbersome and expensive process requiring forklift upgrades and complicated data migration procedures. The result is an infrastructure that isn't adapted to changing business needs, holding up dynamic business decision making instead of enabling it. So now what this kind of created is what we're going to call the 80-20 rule. So in the traditional three-tier, you're spending 80% of your time putting those quote-unquote fires out instead of working on new applications and new workloads. So now, meanwhile, in the cloud, distributed computing matters. Distributed computing technologies have solved these problems with traditional infrastructure available to be utilized by IT organizations through public cloud computing. Now, at the storage layer, distributed storage breaks apart that monolithic architecture of SAN storage into clusters of storage resources that are replicated for data protection, able to self-heal after hardware failures, enabling increased levels of data protection without intensive administration, and is able to present distributed storage resources as logical volumes that are untethered from the underlying hardware. Compute resources were also distributed as well with the virtualization software, which enabled applications to be deployed in virtual machines, or VMs, that can dynamically move between these physical servers without disruption. This enabled virtualized applications to be abstracted away from the physical underlying hardware. Compute, therefore, can be treated as a logical resource for maximum flexibility when deploying and managing applications. So now HCI brings these technologies to enterprise IT, enabling fully distributed IT infrastructure. Instead of needing to deploy these large, inflexible storage arrays, HCI enables data centers that can adjust flexibly to their changing business needs. So let's go back to that 80-20 rule I was talking about. When you go down to the hyperconverged infrastructure route, instead of spending 80% of your time putting out the fires, you're only spending 20% of that time on that, where you can now spend 80% of your time on new initiatives, paying off tech debt, improving your user experience, and improving your product as well. So users have learned from the cloud to expect a few key attributes. First is a faster deployment in minutes as opposed to days or weeks. Second, the ability to pay for only what is needed as opposed to making up for large upfront investments based on predictions of the future. Third, simple management, so they can remain focused on the service as opposed to keeping the lights on. And fourth, a steady stream of improved features and benefits as opposed to waiting for years for the next refresh cycle in order to leverage the new technologies. So now the first implementations of hyperconverged infrastructure combine storage, compute, and virtualization into a distributed infrastructure platform. But it has expanded to support a whole lot more. The key innovation of building IT infrastructure with distributed computing technologies makes it possible to support any data format or application deployment model. So rather than relying on special purpose hardware for each service, HCI enables you to untether the underlying hardware from data formats and application packaging needed for each use case. You can utilize block, file, and object storage from a single platform. And deploying infrastructure services as software gives you the flexibility to more easily implement new types of data and application deployment services in the future, enabling forward compatibility instead of adding more technical debt that weighs down efforts to innovate. You can also focus on building new applications with rapid service delivery by unifying IT services in your own private cloud. So that's a little bit about the history there. Let's talk about our distributed storage fabric, the back end of how everything is stored on your Nutanix cluster. The first thing we're going to look at here is the key architectural highlights of the Acropolis operating system. So now HCI requires a lot more than just putting storage into virtual machine hosts. There are 5 key architectural pillars that enable AOS to replace traditional infrastructure, improving resiliency, efficiency, performance, and agility while simplifying management. First is the scale-out architecture, enabling linear scaling, automated resiliency, and efficiencies that improve with scale. This is enabled by a sophisticated fine-grained metadata system that enables data to be managed in small 4 megabyte chunks for optimal data placement and management. We'll get into a little bit more details on that in a minute. Data locality keeps latency low and prevents storage contention, particularly as cluster size grows. This is made possible by that fine-grained metadata, enabling those small chunks of data to be moved around dynamically. Data locality and an optimized data path that can talk directly to storage devices while avoiding the kernel enables consistently high performance. And writes are always replicated, even when nodes are down, ensuring the highest level of protection for your critical data. So let's take a look at the AOS Storage Pool. There's three key things here, four key things, I should say. You have data tiering, which moves the data up into faster drives when it's constantly used, or down into the cold tier when it's less frequently accessed. It has self-healing technologies. So the second something goes wrong, there's an immediate response by the cluster to alleviate that problem. It's also very easy to add capacity, and it has linear scaling with performance, which we'll get into in a second as well. So now the key things about the distributed storage fabric is that each individual node has what's called a controller VM. This forms an interconnected network within the cluster, where every node in the cluster has access to the data from shared SSD, HDD, and cloud resources. This allows for cluster-wide operations of VM-centric software-defined services, such as snapshots, clones, high availability, disaster recovery, deduplication, compression, erasure coding, and storage optimization, and so on. We also support 3 different hypervisors. We have our own in-house included Acropolis hypervisor. We support VMware's ESXi in addition to Hyper-V. And distributed storage fabric can communicate using the industry standard protocols such as NFS, iSCSI, and SMP3. Let's talk a little bit more about snapshots and why they matter. Snapshots allow you to quickly revert back to a point in time and copy the image or clone, recover deleted files. Now, one nice thing about our platform is that we have what we refer to as optimized snapshots. We use read on write when creating these snapshots, which requires 1/3 of the input, the I/O needed for standard copy on write snapshots with minimal CPU overhead. These are independent of the VDIS, which not only allow you to roll back, but will allow you to roll forward as well. So in that case, where you maybe need to go back to a snapshot and you maybe go too far back, you actually have the ability to push it forward. Whereas most other platforms do not allow you to do this, which is a nice little feature there. These snapshots are created locally. It can be stored locally or remotely based on schedules that you can construct with no limits on how many you have. We have cross-hypervisor disaster recovery, so you can replicate from a VMware cluster to AHV and back. You also have application consistent snapshots available. This captures data consistent with a single point in time for the VM as a crash consistent snapshot would, but in addition, this captures that data in memory and all the transactions that are in progress, which is handy. So now just a little comparison from the way that our data layout is against one of our competitors in VSAN. And I liken this to an argument, I call it the sand and boulder argument there. So with Nutanix, the grains of sand, remember those 4 megabyte chunks that I mentioned earlier, the larger the cluster is, the faster the rebuild is. And I liken that to a BitTorrent download. I'm sure we all downloaded music at some point in our life, but there's more seeds feeding into that rebuild. Now, what I call the boulder or VSAN, if you lose a block, it results in a network transfer of the entirety of that individual piece. And their chunks of data aren't 4 megabytes, they're up to 255 gigabytes. And this is more likened to an FTP file transfer, where you have that single source going to that single destination, which can also congest up your network a little bit. And one other thing to mention here, just to kind of finish off this little conversation on this, Nutanix versus VSAN here. One of the other things too is that when Nutanix sees a failure, it immediately begins that rebuild. Whereas in VSAN, it waits about 60 minutes and can saturate your cache. So that's another thing to keep in mind as well. And failed cache drives also take the disk group offline in the case of VSAN. But moving forward, let's talk a little bit more about how we are flexible and scalable. So now, one of the most challenging and costly aspects of designing a traditional 3-tier solution is knowing how many resources will be needed over the lifecycle of it. HCI, on the other hand, scales linearly and predictably due to its core architecture that automatically redistributes data as new nodes are added, using that built-in node expansion tool. You can buy what is needed for today, for the very near future, and add nodes to scale to different resources as needed. So now, if storage resources are running out faster than compute, you can add storage-heavy nodes. And in the case if only more storage is needed, you can add storage-only nodes. And also, if, say, you need more compute resources and that's running out faster than storage, you can also add a compute-only node to fill that gap there. So the ability to purchase what for the short term and buy more resources as they're needed takes a lot of that guesswork and friction out of buying infrastructure, which is a nice thing. Now, the other thing is that predictable performance when scaling. Remember how I mentioned that every single node uses what's called a CVM or a controller VM. So when you think about a traditional 3-tier SAN, those come generally with 2 controllers, and as you add more storage to that, you're not adding more performance as it goes. Where in the case of Nutanix, as you're adding nodes, you're adding more controllers as you're adding storage, which allows you to get that predictable performance when scaling. One other thing to mention is that we are basically an open sandbox to all the different platforms that we support. If say you have customers that are HP houses or Dell houses or Lenovo, etc. We have partnerships with all these hardware vendors, and we support all these different platforms. We are also supported on multiple public cloud vendors such as AWS or Azure. So we're very flexible to working with those different options. Now, in every IT environment, patching and upgrades are a critical part of remaining compliant and secure, reducing unexpected downtime and adding value from new features. But patching is time-consuming and error-prone, and often requires complex compatibility matrices and manual dependency mapping that can be costly or, if neglected, can lead to exposure. The Nutanix Lifecycle Manager orchestrates patching and upgrades from the firmware of the individual hardware components up through the hypervisor and the various Nutanix software components as well. Bring that into one nice little single place there, which is a wonderful thing. Now we're going to talk a little bit about Prism. This is one of my favorite parts of the Nutanix platform personally, just from my experience in the enterprise data center world. Now, as I mentioned earlier, you have all of these individual silos, in a traditional 3-tier situation. And each one of these silos has its own application in general. So you got something for servers, something for storage, something for security. And the great thing that we do is we bring that all together into one unified management piece called Prism. So this brings us to knowing that like an end-to-end management solution for HV in the virtualized data center is all in one nice little place for you. This allows you to take visuals of your infrastructure management, your operational insight, capacity planning, and performance monitoring. Now, one of the nice little features that it does as well is when you're talking about capacity planning, there is one feature that's called Runway, and it shows you your performance of your cluster and gives you a predictable time frame on when you may need to expand and get another node. So it kind of takes a lot more of that guesswork out, which is a wonderful thing. Now, I strongly suggest that everybody takes a test drive. This is basically what I would call a guided tour through Prism. And you can see the link there, nutanix.com/one-platform. And it takes you through a number of different guided tours, if you will, how to create a VM, how to create storage pools, and a number of other things. And it's a real hands-on experience, so you can get a good feel for what it's like there. Now let's talk a little bit about some success stories. And one thing I will say about Nutanix is we are obsessed with customer success. We have a 96% customer retention rating, a 90 Net Promoter Score, and a 4.9 Gartner Peer Insight score. Now, to talk a little bit more about the NPS score, you might be thinking that, oh, this all sounds great, but there are many players who claim to offer more or less in the similar platforms. But what makes this different? The answer resides on this one slide. NPS, or Net Promoter Score, is a metric used to gauge how likely your peers are to recommend a product based on customer satisfaction. On the left graph, you can see how other names in the industry stack up. And for general reference, on the left, you can take a look at the right side, some brands that you might be more familiar with. Now, one other thing to mention about the score is it's not from 0 to 100. It's from 100 to negative 100. So basically, once you get into the negatives, those are people that'll go out of their way to unrecommend a product. But overall, you can see that we're sitting very nicely there. One last thing we're just going to kind of show here is some Gartner and Forrester charts. Now, not only did we create the hyper-converged infrastructure space, we're most certainly a leader in it. And you can see us up there where we have strong strategy and a strong current offering and the ability to execute as well. Now, that's what I had for the Nutanix part of the presentation here. And I'm going to hand it off to Bogdan. There you go, Bogdan.
Hey, wonderful. Thank you, Tim.
You're welcome.
So I'm going to cover the second part of the presentation, which deals with the protection everywhere. Obviously, we are going to talk about data protection, and when you switch to a new platform, such as obviously Nutanix today, right, you're always tempted to think, hey, what should I do with my data protection strategy? And first thing is probably, hey, let's reuse what we already use. And we're going to talk about that. But there's an alternative, and the alternative, we believe, is a much better option. It's a purpose-built solution for Nutanix that we have developed over the last year and have been developing over the last 6 years. And this is where we are going to deep dive a little bit more and explain why that is a far better option for you. Then, of course, data protection is becoming very useful when we start talking about, well, when do you need to recover? Well, ransomware attacks are one of the big pain these days, or disaster recovery. You also need to have this covered as one of the key business continuity strategies. And that kind of takes you really far, and you've fully covered Nutanix. But there is this little bit which is increasingly becoming more and more important, which is many companies also use SaaS applications. In some companies, it's a kind of a dominant way to deliver software, and that is also something where HYCU can help you with, and also Nutanix technology can play a significant part. And we'll also talk about customer success. So let's get going. So first is legacy data protection. Obviously, as we've seen with Nutanix, the complexity hurts productivity, hurts effectiveness. The same is with also with data protection. So you've acquired a new Nutanix platform, and you've bought yourself a Ferrari almost, and then you start to think, okay, so what do we do with data protection? I'll take the existing product and try to fit it on top of that. Well, you soon realize that there's a bunch of things you have to deploy, actually. You have to deploy agents to your virtual machines. You have to deploy a backup server. Then you need repository server, gateway servers, data movers. It gets really complex very quickly. And it doesn't stop there. Then typically you would also need to deploy what they call enterprise manager, so an overarching console and a separate reporting server, just adding more to cost and complexity. Then imagine how difficult it is to upgrade this setup if you probably are looking at extended weekends and scheduled downtimes and things like that, which Nutanix actually got completely rid of, but your backup is forcing you again in this old kind of IT pattern. Again, something you want to avoid. Very often you also find that legacy backup software is running on Windows and using Windows technology for database. Actually, that these days is very dangerous practice, as we know, as ransomware loves Windows, right? It's very vulnerable system with lots of zero-day attack possibilities, and you just don't want really backup to be that product, that security risk in your environment, especially because it needs to help you when you need it most in those situations. And because of all of these things, you're really talking about very obsolete technology, which is probably 10, 15 years old. So not something you want to pair with your elegant new Nutanix deployment. And at the end of the day, it's also expensive. It requires a lot of work, maintenance, as we've seen. So it's absolutely not optimal solution for your Nutanix platform. So we are really talking about a lot of complexity and as such increased costs when it comes to deploying that solution alongside your Nutanix. And again, you do not want this. And it is not surprising that we find across the, like you've seen NPS score, Nutanix compared it across the industry. Also, HYCU is obviously comparing ourselves across the average in the backup the data protection industry, and the average is really low, 35. So that's not something, and this is where your traditional backup products are typically at, and you don't want to kind of pair this again with your existing new Nutanix deployment. So let's take a look at how simple and purpose-built solution actually looks like instead of the complexity we've seen on the previous slide. So again, we start with the basic building block, which is my new shiny Nutanix deployment. Well, in order to deploy HYCU, you don't really have to do much. HYCU requires near zero deployment and as a result also maintenance. There's a single virtual machine you have to deploy, or we call it a VAP, which is extremely secure, Linux-based, and it comes with zero additional cost. You don't have to buy any software licenses, except of HYCU, of course, for any third-party software or any additional hardware. It simply sits there alongside you on Nutanix and is able to execute backup and data protection for you. Then obviously it's been designed to be extremely scalable. So the way we deliver scalability is if we need to, we spin up additional virtual machines automatically. So again, it is far more efficient and more in line with the way how really the new software needs to be developed, which is intelligent, scale according to your needs automatically. And guess what? There is no additional components you really have to deploy because everything is included. You have reporting in, you have self-service in. So it's a single package solution that you just deploy and start using to full capacity immediately. So a very, very unified experience. And because of that, right, obviously it also becomes extremely efficient. The licensing model is simple and straightforward. So again, you know, just technology to really that pairs nicely with Nutanix. And it's no wonder that because of that, customers really love our solution. And actually, NPS score of HYCU is also 90 plus. It's 91 actually. So we are very happy and obsessed, like Nutanix, with customer success when it comes to that. So we've covered kind of the Nutanix deployed in the most classical way, which is on-premise. But we know that Nutanix can also span across multi-hybrid cloud, across Azure, AWS. You can run native Nutanix service. And guess what? HYCU will also be able to expand and support this hybrid multi-cloud deployment as well. It can even reach into the Google Cloud section of the public cloud, where Nutanix doesn't have a native service yet. But HYCU can help you get there and use that for store backup or for disaster recovery location should you need to have this possibility. So again, complete coverage of Nutanix plus a little extras that will help you if you really need that support. And of course, all this alignment we are talking about, this didn't just come over the night. We have been working extremely closely with Nutanix development teams for the last 6 years. So since 2017, we have been closely looking at what Nutanix is developing in terms of cool, fast, great data carrying technology. And we have always looked to develop a complement data protection technology that will, as efficiently as possible, go and back up your data wherever it sits in this Nutanix technology stack. So there's a lot of onlys on this slide, and I don't want to read through these, of course. I will just point out a few that I really like. One is agentless application backup. This is one of the top features that customers really like. There's no agents to deploy with HYCU, so no touching your virtual machines whatsoever. And this dramatically decreases your amount of work that needs to be put in maintenance, that needs to be put into HYCU. We can simply back up and do application-consistent backups of your virtual machines running on Nutanix without any agents whatsoever. The other one that is really cool is also that HYCU is part of Nutanix validated designs. So there's a number of designs that Nutanix puts out as a reference designs that are validated. And in a number of those, HYCU is a key component that takes care of data protection. So again, showing the alignment that is going on for the last 6 years between HYCU and Nutanix. All right, let's look at some of the things that are less pleasant, right? Obviously, ransomware. Ransomware is all around us, and you have to protect yourselves against it. In other words, you have to make sure that if you get hit, And unfortunately, it's not that much as if you get hit, but when you get hit, because ransomware attacks are so prevalent these days that you will be able to recover. So that's the key point. And this is, where HYCU and Nutanix also come together and deliver great solution for ransom protection, recovery, and any type of disaster recovery, as you like. But let's first look at, what is a good strategy to actually combat ransomware. And as we know, if we need to protect ourselves against the cold, the best solution is, hey, put as many layers onto you as possible, right? Don't just take one big fat coat, take 7, 8 very thin layers. This will protect you much better. The same is with security and ransomware protection. And HYCU, together with Nutanix, we implement a number of layers that will protect you against ransomware attacks. And those layers kind of enable you to really have extremely high probability that you will recover from eventual potential ransomware attack. So there's a lot of these. Again, I will not go through details, but those protection layers have to do with that the backup infrastructure is completely locked down. That it's extremely easy to patch and upgrade HYCU. If you know the traditional backup product, you probably need to take schedule maintenance hours and do it in a couple of hours over the weekend. With HYCU, you can just do it during a normal working day. It's a risk-free 5-minute upgrade to the new version, patch, and you're done. Nothing else, right? And you just continue to operate your backup product. So again, helping you stay on top of the latest patches we release in ensuring that your backup infrastructure is safe and secure. We're encrypting backups, of course, using air-gapped backup storage and immutable storage. This is where we actually partner very strongly with Nutanix, who deliver great technology as part of unified storage. There's this S3 objects technology that we are using to store the backups, and the immutability or warm capability of those objects is natively supported by HYCU. So again, a great tool to protect your backups against ransomware getting after your backups. We are also able to detect abnormal behaviors. So if ransomware attacks you, right, it will start encrypting your files, and obviously these anomalies can be detected. Or HYCU also has protections if you would have a rogue admin that wants to do something bad, and obviously backups are a sensitive area of those malicious intents. And then, of course, a key strategy for any successful DR activity is that you need to do a regular testing. And as part of that, this can be completely automated. Backup validations, we can spin up those in sandbox environments, spin up VMs, check automatically if they're running, shut them down. So, basically zero work on your end, and you have your DR and restore testing done. And of course, the last two elements, HYCU is able, we've heard team talk about the smart Nutanix snapshots. HYCU is intensively using those snapshots to deliver really crazy fast recovery times. And we can also use those snapshots as one of the sources for restoration process. And it's amazing that this capability has actually helped some of our customers recover from ransomware attacks. So again, tight integration between Nutanix and HYCU helps customers recover from ransomware attacks easily. So that's where layers come from, and those layers, will really protect you very strongly against and ensure that recovery is, more or less a sure thing. Okay, so we also have kind of put together a little reference architecture, if you like, where we would protect a kind of a production environment, which obviously would be Nutanix in our case, but of course we can also protect physical servers, VMware, whatnot. The way you would go after backing up is with this ransom protection in a box concept, is that you have a separate Nutanix cluster that has unified storage deployed and activated, and then HYCU would be sitting on that cluster and act like a backup appliance, similar to what some other vendors are doing there. You can actually build equivalent system with Nutanix and HYCU, right? Exactly the same way. So And then if you need more protection, if you need also a very secure archive tier for your long-term backups, like you need to keep data for 7-10 years, you can activate and deploy another cluster and also lock it down completely with immutable backups and have that archive tier also safe and secure on the Nutanix unified storage technology. And if you need the third copy for some reason, why not, right? After all, it's good to have a third copy of data somewhere remote, maybe public cloud. You can also use that. So lots of flexibility, but extremely simple design. Basically, ransomware protection in a box type of a solution that gets deployed extremely quickly. All right. Then the last topic of this is disaster recovery. Again, Nutanix and HYCU have been partnering on this front for a long time, and almost too long, I would say, because customers are spoiled by DR choice or for DR choice. What we have is there's lots of possibilities only with Nutanix technology, of course. But if you add HYCU on top of that, you simply expand this in ways that enable you to accommodate a very large range of any business of operational or cost requirements that you may have. So again, not going into too many details, but if you will ever need to implement DR solution with Nutanix and HYCU, you will have a lot of choice, a lot of options that will hit the price points that you are able to spend. What about SaaS, you may think? Well, we were mostly talking about, obviously, workloads running on Nutanix platform, but what we are increasingly seeing is that certain organizations, the dominant way how they deploy software for their workers is actually that the SaaS applications are being used. Sometimes even up to 70% of total software use would be SaaS. Think of Salesforce, ServiceNow, Dropbox, Slack, all these applications. And guess what? Ransomware does not really care, right? And it will happily go and attack also your SaaS applications. And because SaaS are much less protected than your on-prem applications that can be very locked down and secure, a success rate is surprisingly high. So attacks on SaaS applications, ransomware attacks are more than 50% successful, which is of course a bit scary. So this is how kind of software use today looks like in such organizations. You have on-prem and then some stuff in cloud and then some SaaS, and this kind of is your software stack, if you like, used at organizations. And every backup product out there is extremely successful, including ours, right, at backing up your on-premise or infrastructure as a service in public cloud. But when it comes to these higher layers, including SaaS, this is where it becomes tricky. And as you will see on the next slide, HYCU is actually the only solution that has implemented the underlying platform it is built upon actually gives ability to customers to completely also protect all their SaaS data. So the architecture is enabled to allow you to protect all your data regardless where it sits. So we now have a unique opportunity that HYCU combined with Nutanix, you can go really after your complete software stack that you as an organization are using. You can protect that stack, and regardless where your data is sitting. That's why we say protection everywhere. Right? Regardless where your data is sitting, from on-prem up to SaaS, we will actually make sure that your data is protected in immutable storage and be available for you. Obviously, we also have a number of customers, actually more than almost 4,000 now. And one important thing is that also Nutanix is our customer. I just noticed that there's no logo, obviously an oversight. Nutanix is actually our customer. And what is there is a logo, I haven't seen it. So what better testimonial to a certain technology than that original vendor is also using HYCU to protect their entire global Nutanix deployment. Obviously, this customer success story comes to mind. It's exactly the case that I have outlined in the beginning. A customer has acquired Nutanix, but retrofitted it with their existing backup product. Of course, total cost exploded, backups were unreliable, and this is how they came to us. And very quickly they've seen the positive effect of HYCU. And since they deployed it, they've really seen a great savings. Their ITT is also very small, so they were so happy they didn't have to deal with backup anymore. It was just running there, set and forget type of thing with 100% daily success rate. So a big change comparing to where they were before. And as the last thing, just to make this clear, HYCU has entered last year also the Gartner Magic Quadrant as a visionary. So we are very happy about that. It is a testimonial to that we are doing something in the right direction. This purpose-built way of building our data protection software for Nutanix, also for public cloud and SaaS, actually is proving to be extremely effective and well accepted by end customers as well as analysts. So with that, I will pass it back to it is Barrett, right? Barrett, you want to take over? All right, so we have the this better together thing. If you remember in the beginning, Tim has mentioned, hey, one fantastic thing about Nutanix is we have a single console. Everything, is centralized in a single console. Well, guess what? HYCU is also fully integrated in that single console. So not only will you be able to operate your Nutanix platform through a single console, but also backup becomes part of that. And what you see here actually is a snapshot of HYCU being integrated into this joint console. So you could really say 1 + 1 = 3. So really, again, another level of simplification for customers. Just use a single UI, take care of your Nutanix multi-cloud deployment as well as data protection from a single pane of glass. And this is obviously the Ingram Micro Nutanix team. If you need to reach out to anyone, welcome, feel free to do so.
Yep, so quick overview here. Zach Ward is our solution sales specialist. He's sort of our business development representative, so can help with onboarding, becoming a partner, any sort of sales enablement trainings, things like that for your sales folks. Tim, of course, you've heard from today. Our technical account manager can do technical enablement, such as the content today, but also sizing, scoping, and getting your deals, anything you need to have your deals registered and quoted. Myself, Barrett Irby, our vendor business manager, can be used from an overall strategy perspective, and helping develop those connections you need and acting as a liaison between your company and the vendor. We've got our 2 dedicated Nutanix reps that cover Ingram Micro, Tony Lowry, who is our technical resource, and David Chucky Goodness, our distribution sales manager. He and I work very closely together. But the main takeaway here is we are here to help you and support your Nutanix business.
And for Ingram Micro and HYCU team, obviously Wanda is our vendor manager at Ingram Micro, and there's the whole team that is available should you need to reach out and ask questions about HYCU, the relationship, how to engage with us. But then, of course, we also have a channel team in the US that is available, and reach out to them also anytime should you have any specific questions, or even some opportunities we need to work with, or talk about deal registrations and things like that, partner programs. So reach out anytime. We are happy to help.
Okay, so that wraps up the main content for today. We've got a couple questions that were sent. Let me just get those together here. First one, do I have to be a HYCU partner? What are the requirements to sell HYCU?
Hey, absolutely. So becoming a HYCU partner is easy, right? So you simply reach out to Ingram Micro and you let them or us know, hey, I want to become a HYCU partner. And then transacting and getting this initial onboarding, we will deliver directly with you. We will make sure you're enabled technically from sales perspective, that you understand the benefits of a partner program. And then you simply begin, right? The pricing, the quotes, they all come from Ingram, and you interact with Ingram and with our technical teams and customer success teams. We will make sure that pre-sales you are fully covered, and our sales teams are going to help you, do these last few inches of kind of closing the deals together and just make a very successful deployment with the end customer. So yeah, extremely simple. Reach out to us, Ingram Micro or HYCU, and we will lead you through the process.
Very good. Thanks, Bogdan. I think maybe another one for you here. How does the licensing work with HYCU? Can I buy it together with Nutanix, or does it have to be separate?
So licensing is very simple. It is actually very closely tied to the way you have purchased Nutanix. So two licensing models exist. One is per physical socket, the other is per virtual machine. In other words, if you have a certain Nutanix cluster and you simply want to back up every virtual machine on that, you can decide to license HYCU per physical sockets of that cluster. Say you have 5 nodes, each Nutanix node has 2 sockets, 2 CPUs, that's 10 socket license, is all you need to back up the entire virtual machine estate you have on that cluster. So that's one possibility. The second one is you can license per virtual machine. If, for example, you have production and non-production virtual machines hosted on the same cluster, you probably don't want to protect non-production machines, and maybe more cost-effective solution for you in that case is, hey, let's just license our production VMs running, and I will just protect those, and I don't care about non-production ones, or I will just do Nutanix snapshots for those, things like that. So that's the 2 key ways how you can license per physical socket or per virtual machine.
Awesome, thank you so much. One more here. Let me just consolidate this one. Looking back to the competitor slides and the Nutanix portion, how easy is it to move from, or hard, I should say, how hard is it to move from VSAN over to Nutanix?
I can take that one. Well, I think you had it right in the first part of it there, Barrett. How easy is it? Because really it is very, very simple. We have this tool called Move, and what that does is it takes all of the VMs from your vCenter cluster, and it moves them directly to the Nutanix cluster with the click of quite a few buttons, actually. I'd be happy to show this in a hands-on experience, what we call a HPOC, or a hosted proof of concept. Just so anybody that would like to see how simple it really is, can kind of see it hands-on, because really the proof is in the pudding. I could talk about it all day, but when you really see how simple it is, you'll get more of an understanding of how easy life can be for yourself on that side of things. Hopefully that helps answer that.
All right, thank you, Tim. That covers everything, I believe, for today. So thank you, everybody who was able to join. Thank you for your time. For those that weren't able to join, this webinar has been recorded, and the link to view will be sent out as a follow-up. So be on the lookout for that, and please do feel free to share with coworkers, colleagues, customers, etc. You'll have our contact information on there, but also, again, we'll be following up. So please feel free to share again. And also, if you're willing to or able to provide feedback, we're certainly open to that as well. On behalf of all of us, thank you so much for joining today. and we look forward to working with you moving forward.